I ate Chinese food today, and there was nothing in my fortune saying that I was going to have a broken bone or anything. So fuck it.
My name's Ed Piscor.
I'm Jim Rugg.
Jim, what weekend is it?
August 1st.
2 weeks, I have my X-Men, my last X-Men trade paperback is coming out, something like August 15th, whatever Wednesday is in the teens of this month.
It's wild how much time there is to get to that point, and then once those books start coming out, it just feels like they've been released. Man, it's gone fast.
I'm really used to working with Fantagraphics, and they print in China. Whatever happens in China happens, the slow boat comes, and eventually the books get here. Hopefully, there's not like government shutdowns that keep my thing stuck at the wharf, as it's happened twice in my career so far. We're going to have a pretty big October in terms of like Kayfabe releases, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody that's watching, let me please plug Street Angel Deadliest Girl Alive, because right now it's in previews. So, if you're watching this channel, if you're familiar with comic shops, that's their order system, and it's currently in that system. So pre-orders are open now. Tell comic shops about it. It's the big book for me. It's kind of like all the Street Angel that I've done at Image plus some is going to be in that book. It's $20. It's the perfect kind of like pile of comics for a price point. But let your shops know, like that's really an action item that can be done, that can make a difference. And it's a weird system, but now is the time to do that for an October book.
Right. It's a $20 book. It's 240 freaking pages. It's a doorstop. It's a phone book. And we put out a video this past week about the evolution of Street Angel and how, like, sort of, it tracks the trajectory of this character, of this book, of this property, going back 16-something years, 17 years.
Yeah, it's interesting to think of it that way. Obviously I spent a couple years doing it and then spent 10 years doing other stuff and then came back to the character. So it's not, 16 years of continuous work, but it definitely is like, you can see my evolution as a cartoonist from those early Street Angels to the more recent comics. It's thousands of pages between those first pages and the most recent ones.
It was an inspiring video to me, and Kayfabers out there who are makers trying to like find their footing in the game, I implore you guys to check that video out, because it goes to show you, like, whatever you have access to, there might be this like general, like this grand barrier to entry in a way of like getting into, say, Image Comics or something. But there are so many proactive steps that you could take earlier than that to put your work in front of people's faces. And mostly what it seems to me that publishers care about most is that they're not going to lose money on your stuff. So if you self-publish, even by way of Xeroxing your work, and you build an audience for yourself, that's artillery or something to give the publisher some incentive into taking a shot on your work. We are, as each year goes by, it seems that whenever they do the numbers, it's always like 5% less comic readership out there. Like paper's gonna be, that just came out recently. 5%, like comic shops have sold 5% less. I don't know that these numbers are going to be increasing in any big margins. So these publishers, they're stretched a little thin, and they're hoping to have like a hit amongst whatever it is they put out. But if you give them a good reason to put your work out, if you want to go that route, self-publish your own comics.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I've heard publishers, editors, and agents all say a version of what you're describing, Ed, and it's this. If two submissions show up and they're about the same quality, you look at the person's following. It's just reality, I mean, like we're our own publicists to some extent.
Yeah.
And I always think of it as like those publishers are business partners. Like we're going into business together, so if it looks like I'm doing some of this stuff too, that's attractive from their point of view. And I think you have to do some of it yourself because it allows you the freedom to not be beholden to them either. If you don't like some aspect of their publishing deal, you have other alternatives if you're, out there hitting the pavement, so to speak, on your own behalf. Not always my favorite part of the job, but also this is still a job. Is still a profession. Like, I get paid for those elements. I don't get paid to sit and draw. That's the best part. I do that for free every day of the week, forever. You get paid for those other pieces, the stuff that maybe isn't what you want to do first, but is really important, as you say, to make sure that publisher doesn't lose money on the deal. It's how you get subsequent deals too. You know, a lot of these relationships you build over time because you did a project, it worked out, you go a little bit bigger.
It's one of the great advantages that we have in the medium of comics, or I should say in the comics business, because in prose fiction, it is actually the opposite. They call it vanity press, and they say that with a sneer. And if you self-publish a novel, unless it hits some kind of tremendous gangbusters, which frankly probably just will not happen, because what are you going to do? You're nobody, and you just put together this tome of hundreds of thousands of words, and you're going to send it to a New York Times book reviewer? Are they going to give your self-published gimmick that has, unless it's the greatest opening sentence of a book in the history of mankind, they're going to read the Stephen King one first. And then they're going to get a galley of the 50 Shades of Grey sequel. And then they're going to get, the next
50
J.K.
Shades
Rowling.
of Grey is a good one to mention because that did start out self-published.
Is that true?
Yeah, and it sold gangbusters is how it moves on to, more lucrative, bigger publishing outlets.
That's an exception to the rule.
It is an exception, definitely. I think it's interesting, the history of self-publishing, because comics, it wasn't that way with comics.
Never.
You had self-publishers like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Cerebus and other people that advocated for self-publishing, and it wasn't scorned the way traditional prose were. And that's come around a little bit with digital publishing, but it's any of this stuff, the odds are against you. Doesn't matter who your publisher is. Like, the chances of your book being a breakout hit, prose or comics for that matter, it's definitely a long shot. And I think about that sometimes because we've been talking about this the last couple of weeks, some different versions of this and the business of selling these and how this all works. And it makes me think about things like Industrial Revolution, where everything becomes kind of this mainstream efficient model of output. Arts and entertainment just aren't that. It's not like this is the model and this is what works and then you just print, you just copy that process. Like, it just doesn't work that way. It's an artisan model. I think you can compare it to sports in a lot of ways. Everybody plays basketball, but 0.0001% get paid to do it. It's a long shot, whether it's self-publishing or mainstream publishing. That's a myth that a lot of people have, is like, oh, I hooked up with this publisher, now all I've got to do is make these comics and that's it. And man, I've seen great comic book artists that go down the tubes with that attitude, where they aren't doing any of that promotional part, and the stuff does not sell itself.
Yeah, it's true.
So tell your shops to order Street Angel.
Order Street Angel. My artist edition, my studio edition from Fantagraphics is coming out, the Ed Piskor Studio Edition. Beautifully designed by Jacob Covey, expertly curated by the great Eric Reynolds. I stand behind that package to a T. It is being printed right now in China. We're hoping to have some copies for the Small Press Expo in Bethesda, Maryland in the teen weekends of September, whenever that is. I'm not sure. We got it out of the door a little bit later than we anticipated, in hopes of just gilding the lily, so to speak, trying to make that thing as bulletproof and as good as it could possibly be. Like I said, I'm super happy with that thing, man. I hit up the guys at Fanta because it's a big book. It's an expensive book, $150. And I want nothing against it in terms of like promotion or like just basically how the damn website reads. So I hit them up, and if you take a look at like the Fantagraphics entry or even the Amazon entry, it says it's 140 pages. It's not. It's almost 200 pages. And every page counts when you have a book that big. So about a 200-page book, 19 by 13 or something.
I can't tell you how excited I am for whenever we sit down with that book and go through it, because you talk about every page counting, and I know you showed it to a lot of people. I was one of them as you were going through, and it's such a tough decision-making process, man, because it is like, you can't include everything.
We made cuts that hurt. But what are you going to do? Add 20 more pages and make it a $200 book? Like, come on.
The flip side is you make cuts that count. You know, like you make cuts that make the book better. Like editing. I often think editing is the most important thing in any art making, and it's not something we all want to do, right? Killing your darlings and making those hard choices. But the end result is effective for that. You know, the more you're forced to really make those hard choices, I think usually the better end result.
I think so as well. So ultimately, October is going to be a kayfabe heavy month at the comic shop because not only is there the Street Angel collection, 240 pages for $20. Like, how can you go frickin' wrong with your buying dollar on that? My studio edition, but presumably that's the release of issue 1 of Fantastic Four Grand Design from our kayfabe lieutenant in arms, Tom Scioli.
Wow, that is a kayfabe month. We need to have that declared kayfabe month.
Yeah, shops, let's do business. Speaking of shops, man, our homeboy Alika from Maui Comics, he sent this to us last week. He sent us a cool package. We have a P.O. Box, P.O. Box 3071, Munhall, Pennsylvania, 15120. It's in the description below. He sent us this box last week, and I just took a quick peek. And I popped for what I saw for the first initial piece that's in here. It's a big package. Like, this is a cool...
Yeah, hold that thing up.
Like, I didn't even know that the post office made boxes this size.
Like that's on maybe a couple skateboards in there or something.
Yeah. So, Jim, like, I'm gonna open this thing up.
I'm psyched. I've been hearing about it.
I only saw one piece, but see, it's unfortunate because, like, I have to open it this way. So, like, it's possible that the best piece is going to be first, or like the coolest piece is going to be first. But we'll make that sacrifice. Now, I wonder, I'm trying to think of how I should open this thing, man, because I don't want you to even look, because I feel like you'll know.
I will, I'll close my eyes.
Yeah, close your eyes, man, and I'm going to hand you something. And, dude, it's not bad. Like, I'm never going to, like, throw you under the bus.
Nervous, eh?
Yeah. Like, I think that you'll be able to tell what this is, and then, like, make some kind of educated guess. So close your eyes, and I'm going to give you this thing, and you're going to, like, what is it?
Oh, shit. Is this a 2x4?
Yeah. So
what's Hacksaw Jim Duggan?
With his autograph on it.
Oh, man.
How cool is that,
That's
man?
amazing. That's great. That's so fun.
Alika, man, shouts.
That is awesome. Way to go, Alika. Thank you very much.
Look at that shit.
Outside of a comic, you'd be hard-pressed to do better on this show.
Oh, and Alika got it a while back. That's 2011, man, so it was in his collection. What a nice guy.
Very cool.
Yeah, it'll be honored, man. I feel like maybe we should, like, with some of the, like, really cool shit that we get like this, we might have to start stacking up the table a little bit.
We're going to need, like, a trophy case or something to show this stuff off. That's fantastic. What a great gimmick.
I popped immediately, man. All right, man, so we have some Maui Comics shirts. So crack one of those open and show it off because that dude sent us such a cool thing.
This is the second great package that he sent us. Kayfabers, if they are new to the show, several weeks ago, or months episodes, he sent us a collection of Hawaiian comics from local creators in Hawaii, and it was amazing. So that's quite a scene that they're building there, and it looks like he may be the center of it. You know, often shops are kind of the center space.
Maui Comic-Con. Alika, let's do business.
Yeah,
I've never been to Hawaii. I'll get all the are you, like, it's such a clean island. I know that, like, when you bring pets, you have to, like, your pets have to go through a lot of stuff, but I don't know if humans do. And if we do, listen, I'll do whatever I need to be invited to that thing. So Alika sent us this thing, including some shirts, some Pineapple Man stuff.
Very cool. One of the comic book characters from the last bundle that he sent us was Pineapple Man.
Check that out, man.
Hey, here's a Jim Duggan story.
Yeah, let's hear it.
So he and Piper were buddies, you know, from they did like some Hall of Fame Legends something house show on WWE, and they got to be friends later in life, maybe early in life too. And he was on Piper's podcast whenever Piper had one of his comedian friends come on and do an imitation of Stone Cold, basically ribbing Hacksaw.
Yeah.
And it's what caused a rift between Hot Rod and Stone Cold. He didn't find it as funny.
Interesting.
But it was very funny. So worth seeking that one out if you're a Hacksaw fan.
some more.
A little shout out here for Maui Comics.
Yeah, so go support Maui Comics if you're in the neighborhood. And this will probably be the...
Very nice.
What else we got behind that?
So posters, it looks like, for the various Maui Comics convention shows. And some of the talent that has appeared at those.
Yeah, how are you going to have these guys and not us? What the fuck? That's pretty fun.
That is good.
Alika shouts, man.
Yeah, thank you very much.
So last weekend was my birthday, Jim. I turned 37 years old, and it made me think about when I met you. Basically, I met you when I was 21 years old, and just reverse engineering like all that transpired like leading up to that point of like meeting you. So I turn my birthday is July 28th. In September of that year, 2002, 2003. In August of that year, I quit my job. I got myself in the black from paying off school debt from that 1 year at the Kubert School. I had to basically throw all the money I had to pay down like about 30 grand of debt for like that 1 year. And it took me like 2 years at a very shitty job at a very shitty call center, like straight out of school. You know, like they don't give you much time when you're done with school before you get that first loan check and that bill. And I realized like, oh, I don't want to start my life this deep in debt. So shouts to mom and dad, let me stay at the crib and not pay rent and just pay that shit down. You know, super privileged position. But also, I humbled myself, paid that off, and for some reason, I can't remember why, it had to do with Rob Liefeld, but I wanted to become a comics pro by age 21. That was important to me. And I quit at the call center in August. I worked at a haunted house in September and October down at Station Square. They change everything up and call it Station Scare. And I worked in the House of Phobias. So I had a stray jacket and like the little Hannibal Lecter muzzle and then bloody rubber room. So people would come in and I would pretend that the stray jacket was connected, but then like when they would get close, I would like lunge at them.
That's good.
Scared a lot of people. It was really good, man. I got punched in the I got kicked in the face.
If you got punched.
Yeah. But not out of malicious. It was reaction.
Yeah.
Fight or flight. Some motherfuckers fight. A couple motherfuckers fight. While I was working down there, I was sending packages out in a Todd McFarlane fashion, 50 a week. And I sent out about 200 by the time that in October, I come home after a day's fucking work at the haunted house, and I got a call from Jay Lynch at Mom and Dad's house waiting for me. And that was awesome. This is before social media. This is before many cartoonists even had websites. And I found the addresses of all the cartoonists that I really liked that I could find, email addresses, and then corresponded that way. So that's how I met up with Jay Lynch, and I discovered his work from Comics by Les Daniels. Some of his work was in there. Nard and Pat is his famous underground comic, Chicago. And then the American Splendor movie was new. I sent packages to Harvey Picar. Got no response for the first 2 or 3 of these packages over the course of August, September. And in October, like days after Jay Lynch hit me up, Harvey Picar hit me up. And the movie is out. He was never more popular at that moment than he was right then. He was on Entertainment Tonight. I saw the movie twice here in town. I dragged my homeboy HB to go see it a week before he gave me that call. And Harv had a very gruff, grizzled voice, very, very Krusty the Clown. In fact, the guy who played the voice actor for Homer Simpson and Krusty the Clown played Harvey in the stage play. So I imagine that when he got in a Harvey voice, I bet you it sounded like Krusty the Clown. I thought it was my homeboy making fun of me. And my friends, like my relationship with my friends, it's not frat boy shit. We don't pull ribs. It's not jackass. Even though the intro might prove a little differently. But I was like, dude, if this is you, like, this is like a cruel joke because I really want to be a cartoonist, and that would be such a diss. It would get my hopes up so high and bring me down. It wasn't. It was Harv. And it took about a year for that to come to fruition. But in that time, this is October of whatever year that was. Come April is when I first shook your hand at Pittsburgh Comic Con. So I'm still 21 then. And the first issue of Street Angel was out. Like in that time, that summer, I'm not sure when you put the Street Angel mini that was in that video that we posted last week. I don't know when you put that mini in Phantom. Do you remember?
I don't.
Summer, maybe?
Yeah,
because I think I was still gainfully employed at that shitty call center because I wasn't very free with my money when I quit my job, so I must have had it. And I don't know what, Comiccon.com site or CBR, but I saw an announcement for Street Angel, and I'm like, there can't be two pink comics called Street Angel. And I hit you up. And it just, the way things shook out was that April, Pittsburgh Comic Con was going to be the closest time where we would be able to connect. I think you might have lived even further away or something. Like there was some barrier. But we met there in April of whatever year that was. And then later on in that year, October, we were interviewed by the Post-Gazette.
Wow.
It was that year.
I did not realize it was that fast.
I didn't either. When you're young, like a month is a bigger chunk of time.
All this timeline that you're putting together is blowing my mind. I didn't realize that American Splendor movie was that long ago.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah, so like April, we first shook hands. I think maybe a week or two later was our first meeting in Oakland on New Comic Book Day, and we were laying out our plans. It was you, me, Jason Lex. And you had the idea for what inevitably became Aphrodisiac. He was working on putting together the issues for the Amazing Science Fair, Great Science,
Awful Science
the
Fair.
Awful Science Fair. And I was the straggler because I presented my idea for WYSIWYG. And the stuff that you guys had in the works, like had in mind, came out reasonably soon after, within definitely 5 years. Took till 2012 or 2011 for my thing to come out. But it was like motivated by that initial meeting of like, well, what are you working on? I have some idea about this or that. And what blew my mind, like what was really, really great about meeting you guys that young, I was still fucking being such a jerk, like going to parties and just being an asshole. But you guys really humbled me because you were a married man. I think you were the first like person I met who was married, who wasn't like a real old fuddy-duddy. So that was that was an interesting thing for me, man. But the fact that I now have made friends who not only have interesting ideas, but they come to fruition, that was big for me, dude. And that was like age 21, I think I could say is still a formative time. Like you're not who you are yet.
Oh, for sure.
In any stretch. And I could have totally have gone sideways in a different direction. I was working toward becoming like a Spider-Man penciler or something at that moment. I had all this training from Kubert School. I sort of knew the ropes of like what needed to happen to make that shit go down. And I was kind of moving in that direction. And in fact, I hooked up at that Pittsburgh Comic Con, I hooked up with some kind of unsavory characters and actually did some work with them. And you gave me like really good advice about like, maybe this ain't the project for you, man. And I took that stuff to heart, and it turned out to be very, very right, the correct move. So that is sort of what I reflected upon, thinking about the Kayfabe channel, like when my birthday came around, because when you sit at the drawing table and you're drawing, like time compresses in this really weird way when you just repetitively do the same action for, we'll say, 16 years. But just upon that reflection, it's like, wow, that article came out when I was 22, you were like 27, but we really like started hanging out when you were 26 and I was 21.
Wow. Kind of nice to get the timeline recap. Because like I say, like I don't replay that in my head or sit down and think like, oh, that was actually 2001 when this movie came out or that thing happened. Interesting to visit that now and then. I get a lot, like a question that comes up in almost every interview that I do or podcast or anything. People ask about like the group of cartoonists here, and referring to you and Tom. Frank, Lex. Like there's a lot of cartoonists that have come through this area that we've been friends with, and it is, it's pure happenstance that we all met or all happen to live here and be doing this, but the influence is vast. Like it is such a. I'm sure my trajectory would be very different if I hadn't met up with all of you, and it's kind of random. Like if I were in a different city, if it was a different group of cartoonists, who knows?
Yeah.
That trajectory is pretty easy. Like you meet you meet a couple of other people that are pursuing comics. That has the bearings. Like you travel together, you room together, you do all these things, you share notes and contacts and stuff. If it were Spider-Man artists that were in this town, that might have been the direction I went to.
I went to the Kubert School to try to find my people. I would read interviews, Steve Bissett, Rick Veitch, and they had their crew. I forget what it was called, the Flegel Gang or the Flying Dutchman. The Frazetta, Al Williamson crew is one of those. The Kubert School boys, or another, one or the other. And I did not have anybody to talk to about comics for my entire teenage life. Like even up until going to the Kubert School, 100% of the students that was in my first year, everybody brought their like 2 long boxes of like their crucial.
That's amazing.
Yeah, they had their important comics with them. I don't think anybody had a black and white comic. So when I have my 8 balls and my hates and all this and my love and rockets, they're just like, well, what is it? Why are you here? That kind of thing. And even my teachers were kind of like weird about they're like, well, Fantagraphics is never going to pay you $1 and you're never going to make any money there. And it was my lettering teacher who was like the only guy that I had a connection to. And he was the dude who did assistant work with Harvey Kurtzman, lettered Little Annie Fanny, and he was totally tied in. He letters Drew Friedman's work. I would take trips to his house to just, and by the way, the 90s speculator boom, what a letterer was able to afford for themselves, palatial estate.
That's amazing.
Yeah, palatial, beautiful crib, man. And he had original art from Little Annie Fanny. He had. I always heard of Humbug. He had every issue of Humbug, every issue of Help, and I was able to just like go through. So like that was my dude. But when it's when I come back to Pittsburgh and become a professional before the guys I went to school with were out of school. But like when I hooked up with you guys, and I thought I was like esoteric in that I was down with Klaus and like Adrian Tomine and shit, and then you guys start to proffer like crazy weird stuff, silkscreen covers made on the Xerox. Very important stuff to me, man. It's like, okay, cool, I found my people. It's just like I had to like go to this journey way out there, realize that, yeah, like most people in comics are not going to be a threat to my career. Like that's sort of what I got. Like, okay, if you're stoked for Friday to come around, you're no danger to me because you will be working on the weekend happily as a professional cartoonist. Come back and I see like you and Tom at the time. You guys had 9-to-5 jobs and made comics. I had to quit my job because I couldn't compartmentalize the time. Like my job zapped my energy so much that I was like doing anything I could to not be home after a day's work, retail therapy, buying stuff, video games and junk, comics. Like that's how I got all those Lone Wolf and Cubs. You know what I'm saying? Right. It was just like that's how I got. Like I still remember. Like I would just like when I would get a fresh paycheck, put a couple of G's to school loans, and then I'll just buy all of Sandman. And that's how like I just like accumulated that stuff, and it increased my. That was my second year of art school. Like was just like let me start grabbing like these other crazy. That's how I got my 8 balls because as a kid I was too freaked out to like pay $7 for a comic.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I there is no one way to do that.
No,
of course. I was working at the time paying off student loans. So like I was kind of in that same position, and there's so many weird stories about comics and making money at comics and making a living at comics and stuff like that. And some of it is like planning ahead. It is working a shit job for a little while to, create a buffer or to pay off debt or to do whatever. So like, it really wasn't an option for me to not work at that time. And, you know, once the debt was paid off and opportunities were there, then you do take the chance. You know, like you sort of build to that to be ready for it. And I'm sure it looks different for everybody.
Yeah, sure. How do we segue out of that shit, Jimmy?
Well, let's segue into some kayfabe mail,
Let's
because
do
we
it.
got a couple of mail items that are similar and on topic, and we'll spend a couple minutes with them. You can send us mail. You can send us questions just by posting your questions and comments under these videos. You can also email us at cartoon.kayfabe@gmail.com. And so I have one here from Instagram, JB Draws Stuff. What would you guys say are the most important steps to take before trying to create a book? This is a young artist writer. Do you go straight from writing the first draft of a story to putting down detailed pencils? You know, what's the steps for this? And I'm going to read the second one too because they overlap, and I think our conversation will address both. So the second one is from Andres, and it's he wants to make comics, but he's kind of in the beginning stages and doesn't really know how to do it yet. So his question is, how do you go from not knowing how to make comics to making the best comics you can? He's drawing every day to learn the tools of the trade, but what else does he need to know? Should he go to art school? Should he redraw another Cartoonist comics to learn? What do we recommend? So, as we're saying, keep in mind there is no one way to do any of this stuff. You know, we've described working jobs, not working jobs to try to make comics, and I think that's pretty typical of all of this process talk. You know, we're currently taking a writing class, and the process is totally different than any of the comics. It's not the first comic I've written,
Right.
but it's a different process than I've used before. So keep that in mind as we go through some of this stuff. What are the steps of making comics?
One of the things that the first guy said, I think, was I do a draft and then get started. I don't think either of us, no matter how much our process changes, the first draft. What does our teacher call it in class?
The fuck it draft.
Yeah. Just explode, get ideas down on the page. Rarely are your first ones going to be perfect, but you might introduce some things later on that you could build and weave in earlier. And if you put a lot of sweat equity and creative capital into putting together final polished pages, you're gonna harm your psyche knowing that you have to redraw these pages.
Yes, for sure. That is pretty common to all the experiences I've had, is that beginning draft of you shut your editor brain off and you put all those ideas down. And then you can use those ideas. You can go through and edit those and clean them up and arrange them and fix them and stuff. Definitely, challenge with comics is, as you say, Ed, you want to make these nice looking pages and pretty drawings, but then you don't want to change those.
Right.
So figuring out some kind of system that has steps of drafting, multiple drafts, start with writing, start with drawing, doesn't really matter. There are a lot of great cartoonists that kind of write in a drawn form. I'm always admire them, let's say. I think that's a very pure way of making comics, but not the only way. But what you want to do is just have that ability to change something quickly. So that's why you do drafts. They're not precious. Mm-hmm. So if you are drawing early in the process, you're drawing roughs, something that you can draw 20 of, and it's not a big deal to draw number 21. So that's something to add in terms of steps, is to just have some of those drafts, because the more you can actually see the thing on your screen or on a piece of paper, for me, the easier it is for then my brain to put on the editor hat and kind of look at what I'm seeing. Does it work? Does it not work? Does it do what I want it to do? And so on. So that's what I would do in regards to steps, is just have those drafts as part of your steps, so that you can kind of revise it quickly enough that you can revise again.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be right on step 2 or draft 3 or something. I think I saw on your latest one something like draft 7.
Yeah.
We just did that Street Angel video. I work with a writing partner on Street Angel. We send drafts back and forth. We've done over 100 drafts on a story. So drafts, at least in my experience, there's a lot of them.
I think there are 2 major skill sets that are required to make basically anything creative, any piece of art, that are rarely discussed or talked about. And you hit on one of them a little bit earlier: editing. The ability to, as you said before, kill your darlings. Just because you like a certain sequence, if you're being objective with yourself, Does it really, is it necessary? Should it be there? You have to have that skill set. So maybe let's call it 3 because it's editing, it's objectivity of one's own work. And I think probably the most important one for somebody starting out, in my personal experience, is patience. And what I mean by that is the earlier, and this is maybe for the guy who asked us the second question, because he seems like very sort of like early in the game. Starting out, I would have all these ideas and start making comics. I have maybe 50 or 60 different sets of 3-page pieces that were for like different comics. I could get 3 pages done. And what happens in the early stages of your development and your growth, if you're doing things right, is exponential growth in the art, like a tremendous growth. I could show you stuff like in this Grand Design trade paperback. There are comics, a page of comics in there from 1994. You flip the page, then there's just Deadpool drawing from the same year, 1994, and you could just see this kid figured so much out in the same calendar year.
Yes.
And so that is going to happen for you. Don't be ashamed. Don't feel bad about that. That's a good thing. You have pages to churn out. But even to get to like 1 page, I remember one like almost like luxuriating over this panel that had a punch in it and kind of like racing through the things leading up to that punch. So that's like the first like hurdle of patience that's required, is you got to like make it all work as a unit. The page is the thing. And then you do your like 3-page things, but then your mind and your energy goes to an even better idea. And guess what? The next idea is better because your first comic is going to fucking suck. I can't think of one person who is the exception to that rule.
No, absolutely.
So get it out of your system. Who cares?
Yeah, that's one of the notes I made is like make the thing and then make the next thing because it's tough in the beginning. I remember doing this for like 10 years and then starting to feel differently about what I was doing.
Same.
Where it was like I could almost, I don't know, it was almost like my expectations. I was better at like imagining what I was going to draw and then the page looking like that or something, because it just wasn't as critical. It wasn't, I don't know, something changed. My perception, my expectations, my abilities, whatever it was like 10 years. And I remember being like, this is weird, it feels different, and asking like everybody about it. And it seemed like that 10-year mark was fairly common. And I think a lot of it has to do with expectations. So one thing in not being too frustrated, because everybody I know hates everything they draw, early on. Mm-hmm. And I think part of that is because you have an idea in your head, and whenever you manifest that idea into the real world, it's always going to be different. And it's easy to just, different's bad. Like I had this idea, this drawing is not that idea, therefore it's bad. It's important to try to step back and be objective. Sometimes that drawing's better. It's always going to be different, to some extent. But that's something to keep in mind because it can be frustrating.
I have some thoughts about what you just laid out about like feeling different, because as cartoonists we have nothing but time to sit and think about stuff and reflect
and stare.
Sure. So I've had the same come to Jesus moment or whatever, where it's like things are different for me now. Like the way what I describe it as is I now make, since hip hop family tree #1, I now make Ed Piskor comics. And when you're starting out, you have all of these influences. Right now we're surrounded by tens of thousands of comics, and they all inflected themselves upon me in some form or fashion. And the best of them, why would you not want to make Love and Rockets #2, the Jaime story, or Batman Dark Knight Returns? Why would you not want to make that? It's a safe bet because you have empirical data of which you could point to on the shelves and say, that is a successful comic. And then you have to realize that your experience, the things that you have gone through are not what Frank Miller has gone through, and it's a different life than Jaime has lived. You have to make your comics, but there is nothing to point to in all of these 10,000 comics that will give you a sure bet that your brand of comics is going to hit or connect or resonate or even be good. I think that everybody has the capacity to make good comics. It requires those things, editing and the objectivity, but it's a vulnerable thing. And you have to kind of build those calluses. We're here. We have a YouTube channel, man. Our calluses are getting thicker. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle shell level thickness. But it's not necessarily a bad thing to work up to that. You know what I mean? Especially since people get to you so easy. So, do your thing to start, but you will begin making your comics that are uniquely you after some time. Now, that said, there are many exceptions to that rule where people very, very early have kind of found themselves. You and I are from a different generation where we didn't necessarily have access to the internet the way the younger people do. So I see a lot of very young cartoonists who are making their... Tilly Walden makes Tilly Walden comics, and I don't think she's 21.
Yeah, right.
You know what I'm saying? So it's possible.
There's no age.
I'm
There's
too
no
old.
age as to like.
Yeah.
That's not a requirement for making comics, for making good comics, learning to make comics at all.
But I was just trying to articulate that piece that you described, because that's what I think it was for me, is just like getting comfortable in my own skin to like put my own self out there.
Yeah, and an aspect of that is having somebody read the comics, and especially in the beginning, whenever they're bad, that can be hard, but it's also instructive. You'll see that what you think is on that page is not what a reader sees on that page, and good, bad, whatever, ultimately you're making this stuff to be read, so you need to fold that into the process pretty early on too. One thing that cartoonists do is find other cartoonists that they can exchange work to read and to kind of give feedback, which we did early on. And a lot of, like I used to mail stuff. I had friends around that I had met through shows and things. Now people meet them online. I'm always a little bit jealous, like Michael DeForge's generation of cartoonists, several of them knew each other online when they were in middle school and they were making comics and sharing them with each other. And I always think like, man, that's incredible. So it's important though, that feedback piece is important, something to add to the puzzle as well.
Before we get out of here, can we do a little spoilers?
Let me do one more quick Kayfabe mail.
Okay.
All right, one more letter. Tyler sent us an email asking for Western comics recommendations. Cowboys.
Yeah.
So I tried to brainstorm a couple quickly. Like he mentions Mobius's Blueberry, great Western comics, a little bit expensive, might be hard to track down in America. So some other stuff off the top of my head. Marvel and DC, Western comics were a popular genre, like crime comics and horror comics. So you can find Marvel and DC stuff from Golden, Silver Age, some of it beat up and not too expensive. I wrote down Rawhide Kid 125 because it's a great Jack Davis story. But Jack Davis drew some of them. Doug Wildey drew some of them. There's a lot of good artists that worked on this stuff, and you can find them here and there, and some have been reprinted inexpensively. Alex Toth did a big run on Zorro comics. Amazing. Those have been reprinted by at least 3 different companies. So again, not too hard to come by, not too expensive. Rio by Doug Wildey. Jonah Hex by Jordi Bernay was in the 2000s. Beautiful European artist. Jonah Hex by Tim Truman.
Oh, yeah.
Really cool stuff. Scout by Tim Truman, which might be post-apocalyptic more than Western, but it's set in the desert Southwest. So I thought I would add that. More importantly, though, call to the Kayfabers out there. What are some good Western comics, some good cowboy comics? Post your answers in the comments below, because I realize I don't know that many of them. So
you hit the ones that I know, and I would add Two-Fisted Tales, Harvey Kurtzman. It's not exclusively Western, but the best Western comics I've ever read are in there. My favorite one being a Jack Davis story, where it followed the same revolver as it exchanged hands from several different gunfighters over time. Very cool story.
Very awesome. So I'm sure we're leaving a lot off of that list. Hopefully the Kayfabers can fill in a couple for me too, not just for Tyler.
You saw that new Tarantino flick?
Yes.
Spoilers for people who care about that sort of thing, man. But we might get into spoilers. We might not, man. How'd you feel about it?
I enjoyed seeing it very much. I don't see a lot of movies in movie theaters anymore, so that was very fun. I like the look of it. Very attractive. Lines up with me. There are a lot of filmmakers that I don't like editing styles. I don't like their color palettes. That was not the case. I thought it was beautiful. I enjoyed it very much. May see it again in the theaters. That said, I don't know how I feel about it overall. It's a very strange movie in that it's kind of empty. I can't tell you exactly what that movie's about.
Right, that's the interesting thing. And I posed that question to you last night of like something to think about for whenever we come here today. Like if this was 1995 and Hollywood Home Entertainment, the video store that I used to work at, still existed, and that VHS tape comes into the store, like where do you put it? Like it's going to go in the drama section.
Probably. It's weird. I don't know where you put it because is it a comedy? Like it's funny. There are a lot of funny parts in it, and I think intentionally funny. There are a few action pieces in it. Like I don't know where you would put it.
That's where the spoilers come in. There are bits for the past, I'd say 3 films. I think I detect a little bit of trolling on Tarantino's part with like the younger generation. He always gets taken to task for the violence in his films. He gets taken to task for, some of the language. So like, when he puts out a Django or he puts out a Hateful Eight, he's using lots of like epithet. And this is after lots of criticism. So he's doing that. I see it as trolling. And the violence, even Hateful Eight, and certainly this one, not only is there going to be like horrendous violence, but some of it will be directed to ladies, man. And the Brad Pitt character is, he committed a heinous crime in the past, and something that is unforgivable, and he's a hero in this movie. So it's like, to me, it's like he's pointing out that like, yeah, you could like throw stones. Motherfuckers could do awful shit, but they could also like just redeem themselves in a fashion.
Yeah, that's a pretty good. I think that's probably a good way to look at this movie, because there is no clear hero per se.
Yeah.
And maybe it is a response to trolls, to cancel culture, this idea of like things aren't black and white. This guy who did a terrible thing in the past is also saving somebody here in this other situation. So, if he weren't there, this would be a very ugly scene otherwise. It's an unusual movie in that regard, because I have been thinking about it a lot. And I mean, it's so indulgent in that this is a movie about filmmaking, right? Filmmakers love to make movies about filmmaking. We talk about comics that feature cartoonists as characters, and
not enough
of
them.
Exactly. So you get that, and it makes it beautiful in a lot of ways, because it's the mythology of really our visual culture. Like things have changed now. I think other stuff, video games and YouTube and all these things are different now. But we grew up where film was that was it. That's how we learned to understand moving images. And that's what this is. It's kind of first and foremost a love letter to that and to the fantasy of that. Like there's a great moment when Manson family followers talk about these actors taught us to kill,
right?
From watching their movies. And I think about that all the time. I mean, that's a debate that I grew up hearing about the violence of film and what effect it had on the viewers.
Another piece of trolling right there, in my opinion. That, like, what I like about Tarantino is a lot of his stuff, his characterizations, shit like that, he never tips his hand at like what he wants you to think about the character. He like gives you space to come up with your own conclusions about the characters. But that was like probably the most like on the nose piece for me as the way I was like sort of interpreting things, because it was like it was parodying the middle American fucking mom whose kid goes to school and kills somebody and she needs something to blame other than herself or himself if it's what I'm saying. So it's like a little bit of that was like injected into the thing, and that was probably the most like on the nose piece of the thing. But to me, the film aligns with superhero comics in a lot of ways, in that there's power fantasy shit in there. It's
definitely laced with fantasy through and through. It's and a lot of different
perfect
characters.
Title.
Yeah, that was one thing I thought about after watching it, was whose fantasy are we watching here? And I think it shifts. Mm-hmm. I think it shifts several times. Sometimes it's audience, sometimes it's probably Tarantino, as well as, various characters throughout the run of the movie. I like that idea, Ed, about not giving you the information to decide, is this character good or bad? I've talked to lots of college classes, visits, do art demos, things like that. And one class that I visited, they would read a different comic. Like all the students would suggest a comic at the beginning of the semester, and then each class they would, as a group, read a chapter of it or whatever, and then discuss it. And one of the comics was kind of ambiguous like that, and the response was hostility. It was upsetting to not know, like, I don't know if I can, if it's okay to like this character, or they're cast in a charismatic position, as a protagonist, for example. It's natural that you would gravitate towards them. They're in this role that makes them the hero, anti-hero, person that you're following, etc. You relate to, but then they're not a perfect person.
They do unsavory
So how
things.
do I feel about this? I'm on one level cheering for him, and on one level conflicted. And so, I think that's really an interesting. Just as a storyteller, I think that's interesting. We in our writing class, there was a note on one of my characters, the idea that she has these two themes that are in conflict with each other. That's great to me. That's almost every person I actually know is that. So it's kind of an amazing detail, but I do think it invites a certain hostile reaction.
I want to get into a spoiler before we get out of here, because this is like amazing to me that it even happened, and very odd, and I don't know how I feel about this per se, but Tex Watson, Sadie, Katie, these people are alive, and they're in jail, and their likenesses are being used, and they're in this movie, and they get to be murdered and killed and all that stuff. To me, that's amazing that these people still have they could sue, right? Like
I don't know.
It's fascinating. It's something that makes me really curious, because I would be so scared to do that. Like a lot of things that I like about the best art is that you get the sense of like, oh, I didn't know I could do that. And the fact that that he did what he did with these real life people and got like Hollywood backing. And you got to imagine their legal departments are big wusses and going to play it safe as much as they can. Yeah. So, like, I'm curious, like, how is that possible? Like, how do they skate the law? Like, I guess they can make sure that these people never see it. They're never coming out.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's some obvious legal answers for all of this. I think convicted felons can't profit off of their crimes.
No,
so
they
like
can't.
Some of that stuff would limit going after and what are the damages?
Oh, interesting. I didn't think about it in that.
I don't know, man. I have no idea. Yeah. I also can't imagine that Tex Watson and Squeaky have a law team that can really go up against the Hollywood law team. So I don't know, man. Maybe they are being sued.
It's interesting, and I think it really communicates also probably exactly what Tarantino feels every time he sees in the news. Like, it just happened fairly recently, like one of those girls like had to come up for parole, and they have to go through the due process of all of that, and of course they'll never get out, but they have to go do that, and then it like drums up all of that horror again in the public in the consciousness. And I bet like Tarantino has the thoughts that he feels whenever that comes up in the news. I think he expresses in this flick at the end there.
Probably. I think growing up in that area, you have a very different reaction than than I do, being born after the Manson family stuff. True. And also not being in that area. I think if you lived through some of that, like,
yeah,
you are, there's a scar there. That's a big event.
It's a monster. Like, you have monsters in town.
Tex Watson, I think, has fathered several children from inside.
It's amazing how that stuff works out.
Yeah, that's obviously legal. There's legal. All of this stuff is spelled out in our legal system, how this stuff can work, but it's kind of an interesting footnote to that. I had one other thought on Tarantino, knowing that we were going to maybe talk about this movie.
Yeah.
I don't know that he's had any formal film training. I think he studied acting a little bit, but, with an actor kind of outside of a university system or whatever. But I don't know that he's had any formal film, university or academy training. And I think that's part of the attraction people have to him, especially makers. It's when we talk about like Image Comics and their rise to prominence, part of it was like their art was weird in a way that the best kid in high school sitting in the back of the room that's obsessed, it kind of looks like their stuff. And I think Tarantino might bring some of that to his filmmaking in a way that really connects to an audience, especially an audience who maybe loves movies and aspires, at least in their mind, that they've got some great movie in their head that they could make. He has that quality.
I agree with that. And you know what? I think we could talk a whole nother hour about the subject, but we should probably split because the battery is running low, man. Kayfabers, like, subscribe, and follow the YouTube channel. Hit the bell icon. We'll notify you whenever we have new videos available.
I have two real quick ones.
Hit it.
We're going to be at DCAF, Dartmouth, August 17th and 18th. Strange Adventures is bringing us up there. On the Saturday, we will be giving a talk at their library, which is exciting to me. I love comics and libraries, so that's really cool.
Tell us where the best Dawn Air is to eat, because that's what people from Nova Scotia said I have to eat when I go up there.
Good. I'm glad to hear that tip. Anything else that we need to see there, too, please leave it in the comments below. And also, 15% off of our T-shirts at our spread shop with Summer Sun 15. That's all caps, so that's all I have.
Cool, man. Give them the marching orders and let's get the hell out of here.
Comics 316 says, read more comics.